When I was about 10 years old, I managed to get my hands on a new type of controller for my PlayStation, a DualShock. Not realizing that it wouldn't be backwards compatible with my existing games, I was disappointed to find that nothing in my collection supported the rumble feature. It was then that I happened across Kula World and bought it solely because it said on the back of the box that it could make the controller vibrate. Ultimately, there's not that much in Kula World which causes the controller to shake, but what I got in exchange was a game I'd continue to revisit over the next 2 decades. In fact, I think of all my PS1 titles, this might be the one I've most often dusted off for a quick play session. The objective is deceptively simple: get a ball to the exit by rolling it across a set of tiles. It's the rules governing the tiles which quickly turn this into a perspective-shifting, mind-bending ordeal. Rolling over an open tile edge will allow the ball to move to the other side, effectively shifting the direction of gravity. Puzzles often revolve around this mechanic, either requiring the player to exploit it to their benefit or find a way to circumvent its more undesirable effects. In an era when fully 3D games were really just taking off, this was especially novel, but it's still easy to see how this premise could sustain an entire game's worth of content in and of itself. Even late into the experience, it's not uncommon to be caught off guard by some complex layout or forget a simple technique learned much earlier on. Really, this alone would be enough to make Kula World a worthwhile puzzler. What sets it apart are the extra tricks up its sleeve and the sheer frequency at which they appear. For the first 100 levels or so, a new gameplay mechanic is introduced roughly every 5 stages. Usually this comes in the form of a new tile, never requiring the player to learn any extra controls. Moving and jumping are the only 2 actions the ball ever directly performs. The simple controls, uncluttered visuals and strong level design negate any need for traditional tutorials. When a new tile is introduced, its function will often be clear just from its appearance. Even so, the player is given a chance to learn about the new mechanic in a simple situation before advancing to more difficult iterations on the same idea. After exhausting the mechanic by itself, it's then retired and later recycled as a supplementary part of other puzzles. This leads to some satisfying peaks and valleys in the difficulty curve, and since each new element can eventually return for later stages, it ensures a steady climb in the overall challenge. This kind of gradual introduction of mechanics might have come across as a chore, but the tutorial stages are very brief for players with a grasp on the mechanics. The next stage can then be started instantly, so even if you've played the game before, there is always a sense of progress. It's a good thing the pace is so quick, because it's under repeat playthroughs that Kula World really starts to shine. Partly this is because of the bonus fruit, which provide an optional objective and unlock extra bonus stages. Unfortunately, some of the fruit are merely awkward to get to, but others are risky or require the player to think further ahead than usual. The real star of the show, however, is the scoring system, which is nothing short of genius. Along with the bonus fruit, each stage has a standard assortment of pickups like coins and gems which increase the player's score. Rather than using a life count, as many games at the time did, Kula World instead subtracts from the player's total score when they die. Each death incurs a standard penalty plus whatever score the player had so far in that stage. If this accumulated score drops below 0, then it's game over. This adds a brilliant risk-reward dynamic to every single pickup. Players are tempted to increase their score since it also acts as their health, but the larger the current score, the worse the risk. Every item is valuable, but dangerous. Going out of your way to collect an extra jewel could end up costing you a lot of points. As if this wasn't already good enough, it turns out that being able to lose points works as a better motivation than simply gaining them all the time. Nobody likes to see their progress undone, and the game capitalizes on this by presenting the player with a graph of their score over time after every few stages. Seeing the bars dip isn't enjoyable, nor is it meant to be. It acts as a motivation to do better next time. This changes the experience from a series of separate puzzles to an overall test of the player's ability to master the mechanics. Unfortunately, the save system runs in opposition to this, which I think makes it the biggest flaw in Kula World. It's too easy to play the next few stages, figure out exactly how to finish them, then reload a save and complete them with a perfect score. With so many puzzles to solve, it's totally reasonable to have a save feature, and autosaves were unheard of on the PS1, so this is about the best system they could have implemented at the time. Still, I'd love if this had somehow been able to autosave after each death. It would stop players from abusing the save system to maximise their score. As it is now, this is something the player decides for themselves, and although it sometimes requires starting over from scratch, I think Kula World is best played as though you only have a single credit. The main mode is called Arcade Mode after all. If you do take my advice and give this game a try, I recommend starting over from the first level if your score ever hits 0. Not content with its unique and interesting scoring system, the way timers work is also quite novel. Normally, these kinds of items just extend the amount of time the player has and nothing more. In Kula World, the timer is represented by an hourglass, and collecting a new hourglass flips it over. This means if the player has a lot of time remaining and flips the hourglass, they then have less time left than before. This turns the hourglass from a must-have item into something which needs to be grabbed at the right time or sometimes outright avoided. It isn't an incredibly deep mechanic, but it's an improvement because it changes time pickups from a clear choice into something which needs to be considered first. Even the pause screen is well considered. It gives players a view of the stage, but it automatically rotates and zooms in a disorientating way. This allows players to resort to it if they're really stuck, but means it can't be used to trivialize every stage. It's clear then that Kula World has more than its fair share of interesting gimmicks. Thankfully, this is backed up by a simple but solid control scheme which has stood the test of time pretty well. Many early 3D games suffer from poor attempts to give the player full control over their movement with an added dimension. This could be an especially big problem on the original PlayStation since the default controller only had digital buttons. Kula World manages to sidestep this issue by having digital movement. The ball advances one tile at a time or rotates 90 degrees corresponding to a single button press. I do sometimes find myself wishing that the ball could roll backwards without having to turn, or that the shoulder buttons could be used to strafe, but some puzzles rely on the very restrictive movement. With a bit more work on the level design, those extra movement options may have been possible, but even as they are now, the controls work perfectly fine for the relatively slow-paced puzzle solving. The digital nature of the movement is also critical for the unique competitive mode. Rather than competing for scores, the multiplayer mode sees both players taking turns to do whatever they want. The catch is that you need to mimic what the other player did last turn, then add 2 more moves of your own. For example, player 1 might move forward and turn. Player 2 then has to move forward, turn, and perform 2 new actions. Player 1 mimics those actions, and so on. It's not a deep enough mode to be a selling point. You're probably not going to get more than a few games out of it before the novelty starts to wear off, but in a way it exemplifies why the gameplay of Kula World has held up so well over the years. It knows its strengths and weaknesses, it capitalizes very well on what works, and it doesn't overreach. The same could be said of the visuals, which have also aged surprisingly well, mainly thanks to the simplistic shapes of the models. Basic cubes are easy to render and easy on the eyes. The items and enemies are also simple geometric shapes. In fact, the most technically impressive part of the graphics is probably the ball itself, a smooth sphere which naturally deforms as it moves around. I wouldn't be surprised if it had as many polygons as some of the early stages. There's something almost hypnotic about watching the ball texture rotate and turn as it makes its way through the environment, particularly once you have a smooth solution worked out and just need to execute it correctly. This surrealist art style is about as timeless as you're ever going to get. Kula World made as much sense in the 90s as it does today, which is to say that it makes no sense whatsoever and it never will. The blurry skyboxes could certainly look better, but I can say without hesitation that Kula World has aged better than most 3D games from the same time frame. Rounding out the package is a surprisingly strong electronica soundtrack which, so far, has held up about as well as the visuals. It's just the right tone to get you relaxed and prepared for a long play session if you're willing. So why do I keep going back to Kula World? Well, there's several reasons I suppose. Perhaps most importantly because it's a puzzler which knows exactly what it does well and focuses on that as much as possible. There's not much fluff, no story to skip through, no tutorials, not even any time-consuming menus or animations. It's also not quite as constrained as many other puzzle games. There are certainly intended solutions to each stage, but often you can find slight variations to save time, or make a tricky section more safe than it appeared previously. The shifting perspective also makes it difficult to retain the stages in memory for very long, so the later levels often feel totally fresh again after just a year or two. It helps that there's so many as well, including secret levels and bonus stages. There's over 200 to get through. Nowadays I rarely ever think or care about the rumble feature, but I'm glad Kula World has it nonetheless. Without it, I might never have stumbled upon such an interesting little game. I suppose it goes to show that even the smallest of features can push a potential customer over the edge when making that crucial purchasing decision. It also goes to show just how much some games can surprise you with their quality given half a chance. Personally, I encourage you to give Kula World a try if you can. I think it's worth experiencing, if only because I find the scoring system fascinating. If it doesn't look like your kind of thing, then maybe you should pick out some other game based on a totally arbitrary or pointless feature. You never know what you might find if you just take the plunge.